Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you, the Morning Majority. 101.9 FM. AM 630. WMAL.
7:07 on the Morning Majority. We've got our legal expert, Joe DiGenova, who only gets into legal brawls, not physical ones. Am I correct?
Not basketball ball.
Yeah.
Morning, guys.
Hey, how are you?
How's it going?
It's great. I want to report that I got called for jury duty. You remember the last time?
Oh, yeah, that's right. How'd that go?
And I'll say this. I'm usually very critical of Montgomery County about the inability to fill potholes and, one-party government. But I will tell you this about the court system. They were polite. They were professional. They were efficient. The jury commissioner and the judges that I got to see were fantastic, very fair-minded, obviously. And my fellow jurors were, a fairly nice bunch of people. I did not get to sit in any cases, but I was called to two courtrooms and went through initial voir dire, but I regrettably was not seated.
Okay, so isn't that the way it usually happens, though, with lawyers? They never get
yeah, it's pretty much impossible.
Same thing with reporters, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to get seated. But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm glad I did it.
And I love the way you say voir dire, because back in Texas we call that voir dire.
Voir dire.
Voir dire.
Yes, I remember it.
All right.
All right,
here we go.
So let's go with a little bit of Fast and Furious. There's some inkling from the testimony the other day from Holder that there may be some emails to a private Holder account that perhaps he's not given up at this point. What are the legal restrictions on where he's allowed to email from? I remember this being a big deal in the Bush administration as well.
The government has established rules now where if you use your private email account for official government business, those emails are not private. What the Attorney General is doing is, this is rope-a-dope at this point. They're going to do everything they can to delay producing as much information as possible and try to run out the clock and see what happens with the election and whether or not the House changes hands and the subpoenas go away from the House. It's an understandable strategy, but I think probably in terms of turning over documents, they can fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. So unless the Republicans are willing to do a contempt of Congress in Congress itself, in other words, without sending it to the local U.S. attorney to prosecute as criminal contempt, I think the Attorney General wins on delay, but I think ultimately this takes a toll on the institution of the department. So we shall see.
Well, he seems to be making the argument that he is entitled to some executive privilege here.
Right. Well, they don't want to use those words. You notice he hasn't said executive
No, he's not said those words. But
that's a very ugly Nixonian word. But the truth is that's exactly what they are, what they're using. It's executive privilege.
And how is that likely to play out as we go forward?
Executive privilege works if it involves national security and a few other very important things, but generally the politics of the situation generally break it down. And unless you're talking about investigative information about an ongoing criminal case, it's a loser. It's a loser for the administration. I think ultimately they're going to have to turn over everything.
All right.
But it won't be until after the election.
Now, you have been, I have to say, you have been sort of a supporter of Eric Holder. Given his last performance before Darrell Issa and gang over in the House of Representatives, how did you come away feeling about Eric Holder after that?
Well, actually, I have to tell you, I thought Eric did a pretty good job of deflecting the questions. One of the problems with...
Well, but I mean, what he needs to be doing is deflecting. Shouldn't he be answering them?
Well, if you're in his position, the last thing you want to do is answer as much as you can. I would like to see the entire department just turn over everything. I mean, that would be my position. But they don't want to do that. I think that's unfortunate, and I think it will ultimately harm the Department of Justice. But so, whether or not Eric has helped himself or not, probably not in the long run. But this does not seem to be an issue that the American people have gotten their teeth into yet. Some of us might argue that they should, that it's really important, that it involves the integrity of the administration of law enforcement. It's a very ugly situation. This is the problem with Congress. 50 members asking questions, nobody's able to follow up. You're ended up with a few sound bites. And, it's usually the executive branch usually wins in those situations.
It could also be that it's not getting a lot of coverage in the mainstream media. I mean, I noticed the Washington Post took this story and put it on, I think, B4 in the Washington Post?
I don't know who owns this story other than maybe Fox News, which took this story from day one and ran with it and has pounded on it. Beyond Fox, it is amazing when you read the national newspapers and go and look at websites. Other than the Drudge Report and Fox, it has not, sort of gotten out there.
Yeah. Well, I have to give a shout out to Daily Caller too, which has been,
Yes,
but it is largely
That's
internet
true.
and sort of alternative media that's banging
and
the drum on
WMAL,
this.
by the
Yeah,
way. We've been on this story
That's exactly
big time.
true.
But let me ask you about the Occupy folks are going to go out and stop work at some ports today, and they're still living it up, and I do mean living, and making our public parks into episodes of Hoarders all over the place. I have a question about, so the Tea Party in many cases had to pay permit prices or to go through all sorts of hoops to get permits to protest, right, and then pay for electricity and sometimes cop coverage and all this kind of thing.
Right.
Basically, should the right just in the future say, we're not going to do those things? I mean, it seems like the Occupy folks have gotten away, scot-free without having to deal with any of that.
Let's do a hypothetical here.
Right.
Let's substitute Black Civil Rights Group for demonstrators, and ask yourself, back in the 1950s and 60s, what did governments do when they wanted to stop them? They imposed bonds, insurance policies, permit limits.
Yep.
These same governments have done this for the Tea Party and not for the Occupy whatever. This is clearly illegal activity on the part of these municipalities. It violates equal protection. All of these municipalities are subject to lawsuits as a result of the way they have used what I call disparate treatment of two equal groups of people. It clearly is they don't like the content of the Tea Party demonstrations, and they like the content of the Occupy demonstrations. That is per se unconstitutional. It's a violation of free speech, and I think the Tea Party, which is suing in several cities to get their money back, ought to do it everywhere, and people ought to be screaming and yelling. Do you know, finally, the D.C. business community has gotten arms about the stench and the filth and the disgusting condition of
the Washington Post calls that a vibrant brand of urbanism.
The people at the Post really are out to lunch. I mean, obviously, as close as they are to McPherson Square, they can smell it in their editorial boardroom. That place is disgusting, and the use and enjoyment of that park by every citizen who pays taxes has been denied by these people. And I will venture to say that none of these people live in the District of Columbia. And that they haven't paid a single bit of D.C. taxes. It's really disgusting what they've done to McPherson Square. I mean, there's no question, though, the Tea Party is in the right, and I hope as many groups as possible sue these municipalities that made them put up these bonds and these insurance policies.
All right, Joe, always good to have you here on the Morning Majority.